In all of the uncertainty and difficulty, one constant was always God's love. In 1993, I became pregnant for the second time with our surprise miracle son, Jeffrey. The pregnancy seemed troubled from the start, and as we approached the due date in mid January of 1994, the baby still had not turned. The doctor advised us to deliver by C section, and the date was set for January 18. 4 days before the scheduled delivery, in the early morning hours, I began to experience contractions. We hurried to the hospital and I was given medication to stop the contractions, hoping to wait until the scheduled C section. The contractions did not stop, and the baby was clearly in distress, so the doctor decided to proceed with a C section as soon as possible. That afternoon, Jeffrey was brought into the world with a collapsed lung and some other medical issues. He was immediately sent by helicopter to a large hospital 100 miles away, which had a very good newborn intensive care unit. My husband needed to drive to the hospital where the baby was in order to fill out paperwork and see that he was properly admitted and receiving the care he needed, which left me in the hospital alone to recover from the emergency C section. For 2 days, I waited for my husband to return and take me home from the hospital, with only phone calls to keep me updated on the condition of our baby boy. Finally, he came and took me home, having been told that Jeffrey would need to stay for 7 to 10 days for antibiotics and observation. After a full day resting at home, I was anxious to make the 250-mile round trip to finally meet my baby boy. It was a painful trip, and I had to be pushed in a wheelchair after we arrived at the hospital, but it was all worth it when I got to hold him in my arms. We were hopeful that he would be home in just a few days. The next day, we were told that Jeffrey had been referred to a pediatric cardiologist because of a possible heart murmur. Tests over the next days show that he had a hole in the wall between the two lower chambers of his heart that was not allowing oxygenated blood to circulate properly throughout his body. He was going to have to stay in the hospital longer and receive heart medication in the hope that his hole would close naturally. During this time, we also found out that Jeffrey had been exposed to chickenpox by the mother of another patient in the NICU, which meant that he and a couple of others had to be isolated from the other babies. He would also have to remain in the hospital until the risk of sickness was over. One difficulty piling on top of another. After a month in the hospital, the cardiologist was convinced that the hole in Jeffrey's heart was not going to close on its own, and he was beginning to show signs of congestive heart failure. He would need open heart surgery to correct the problem. But now, we had to wait until the incubation period for chickenpox was passed. Eventually, the surgery was scheduled, and at 6 weeks old, Jeffrey went into a heart surgery. The surgery took several hours, and when we were at last able to see him, we were shocked by all the tubes and wires connected to him. He was also swollen so badly that even his knuckles didn't have any lines. A team of doctors and nurses surrounded him, and we could barely get to his bedside. Late that evening, when we arrived back at the friend's house when we were staying, we were relieved that this exhausting day was over. That is until we received a call from the hospital that Jeffrey was being taken back into surgery.
His heart rate was spiking, and the doctors feared he may be bleeding internally. Back to the hospital we rushed, waiting until early morning for the news that the second surgery in one day was successful, and he was back in the pediatric intensive care unit to recover from surgery. Over the next few weeks, it became clear that Jeffrey's heart troubles were not over. We had been warned before the surgery that there was a possibility that in patching the hole in his heart, there may be damage to the conductive tissue that regulates the heartbeat between the upper and lower chambers of his heart. Unfortunately, this had indeed happened. The chamber of his heart were not beating in rhythm with each other, resulting in a slow and inefficiently sloppy heart function. If it did not correct itself soon, he would require surgery to implant a pacemaker. After a total of 3 months in the hospital, we were finally allowed to take Jeffrey home just before Easter. We also took with us a heart and apnea monitor, which was to be strapped to him every night. It would alert us if he stopped breathing or if his heart rate dropped below a certain level. I don't believe we slept longer than 20 minutes at a time for the next year. That alarm went off so much. In October of 1995, Jeffrey's heart rate was stabilized by a pacemaker which was implanted in his belly with 2 leads connecting to his heart, correcting the problem caused by the damage to the conductive tissue. Jeffrey is 26 years old now, a history student at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He is on his 5th pacemaker and will need to have them changed every few years for the rest of his life. His medical problems have not ended, but he lives in a fairly normal life, attending school, making plans for the future, and enjoying his Bible study friends from CRU. He is not only overcoming heart trouble, but was recently diagnosed with autism as well. But God is using him in unique ways despite these obstacles. The lessons that we have learned along the way are: first, that God never leaves his children. In all of the uncertainty and difficulty, one constant was always God's love. We know that whatever happened, God was always with us. He showed that in so many ways: a comforting word from friends, a phone call, a chance meeting with his servants in the waiting room. He was always there. Secondly, we learned that God uses his people to minister in his name. The people of the church that my husband was pastoring when Jeffrey was born were remarkable in their care for us, dropping by the hospital to see us, slipping us a few dollars for gas or meals. We were never in need during those months. Their patience and support were amazing. Third, we see how God is still working out his plan in Jeffrey's life. He has had a bumpier road to travel than many people, yet we see him willing to serve in whatever way he can. God is using him, and we are so proud of our miracle boy.